Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another Witch Wednesday, and today we are once again looking at a tier maker here on tiermaker.com made by someone in the witch community, and this one is ranking the characters from Witch to decide whether you prefer certain witch characters in the comics, the TV show, or if you like them equally. So I thought this would just be a fun thing to do for today. It is made by a friend of mine, so I thought it'd be really fun. Okay, so our tiers for today, we'll just rattle through them. We have I like them better in the TV show. I like them equally. I'm indifferent about both. I dislike them equally. I like them better in the comics. So yeah, that makes sense. So up here we have characters we prefer in the TV show. At the other end we have characters we like better in the comics. And then we have if we like them equally, if we dislike if we like them in the comics and the show the same, if we dislike them in the comics and the show the same, so we just don't like them in either version, or if we don't have any particularly strong feelings, either way. So all the pictures are obviously from the show because characters from the comics who aren't in the show obviously don't factor into this list, and also characters from the TV show that weren't in the comics won't be in it either. But this obviously makes sense that we're using pictures from the TV show because if they were in the TV show, on the whole, they were in the comics. So let's get into it, shall we? So we're starting off with Miriadel, who is Elyon's adoptive mother. I think I'm gonna say I like them equally for Miriadel and also Alborn, who is Elyon's adoptive father. I really like Alborn and Miriadel in the show. I really like the way that they were written. I think they're really nice characters. I really love one of my favorite bits in like the whole show is the bit at the very beginning of K is for Knowledge when Meridel is crying to Alborn because Elyon's been captured by Nerissa, which just proves like how much they love her. And Alborn says like that she was just pretending to be Trill to get close to our daughter, and then he catches himself and he's like to the Queen because they're supposed to be like her advisors, but they raised her for 13 years, so to them she is their daughter. That's how they feel, and I love that story. I love that part of their character is that way that even though they know that Elyon isn't their daughter, they still feel like she is. And Elyon says it herself. She's like, but her heart, and she's like, it will always lead back to you. You raised me for 13 years. She loves them, they love her, it's adorable. But they are pretty much the same characters in the comics. They do still love Elyon, and they try to help her when she's like towards the end of arc 1 when she's sort of confused about what to do and what side she's meant to be on. So I think I like them equally in both because they are just really good people in both versions. Caleb, this is not even remotely a discussion. This is not a debate. Obviously, I like Caleb better in the TV show. Caleb in the comics sucks. Caleb is one of the worst characters. Well, I mean, he's not the worst. Like, he's not worse than, like, Lady Chemical or Lady Gaga or, Aria of Arcanta. He's not worse than them, but he sucks because he's just a big doofus. He adds nothing to the story. He makes Cornelia cry, so screw him. But Caleb in the TV show is like my favorite character. He's funny. He's he has a good brain for like strategy, not the best brain for like intelligence, but he's clever in the way that matters to be a rebel leader. And he's fun, and he's charming, and he's sarcastic, and he's funny, and I love him. He's a riot. We know this. We know I love Caleb. I've talked about him so many times in this channel because I love that man. So obviously I like him better in the TV show because in the TV show he is a character. Like he has a personality and is relevant and does stuff instead of like the most significant thing that ever happened to Caleb in the comic was that he turned into a flower. And that's not great. Like, when your character's most significant thing that they ever did was die, they maybe weren't the best character. Cassidy. So that's also going to be an I like them better in the TV show. We don't really get to know Cassidy much as a character in her own right in the comics because that arc to do with the former Guardians is written quite significantly different in the comics. And Cassidy obviously does come back to life in the TV show, whereas she is just dead in the in the comics. But we were actually having a conversation about this just recently about the way that Cassidy refers to her own demise in both versions. So in the TV show, she has this conversation with Nerissa where she says that she's let go of the whole material world thing. And Nerissa kind of half apologizes for any part she may have played in Cassidy's death. And Cassidy's like, may have played? But ultimately, she kind of says that, like, as much as she is obviously annoyed that Nerissa killed her, that it's been like 40 years and she's over it. But she's still quite obviously like not better, but just there's obviously like that thing there where she's kind of like you did kill me though. Like you did kill me. You do have to acknowledge that like you murdered me. Like we're besties and like, we have a history and I love you, but you murdered me. So I also find out that she wanted to be a pediatrician. That was what she was planning to do with her life, which is so cool. The fact that that's what she wanted to go on and be. She was, she loved the beach. She liked to make out with lifeguards. She was late home on prom night. Like from that one episode that we get with her before she becomes a thrall, we learn so much about what she was like before she died. And we found out she was really close to her mother and that it's her connection with her mother that finally cracks her like hard shell that she's put up. That, this idea that she's fine being dead. She's got no reason to come back to the living world. She's perfectly happy in the afterlife. And it's seeing her mother that finally shatters that and she admits that she actually would prefer to be alive. And in that one episode, Emma's for Mercy, we get so much from this character and it's so good. And it's great, to get so much personality from one character out of one 22-minute episode that, she's not even in every scene of. Whereas in the comics, we don't get a lot about Cassidy other than what other people tell us about her. And the difficulty, of course, with a character who is posthumous is that you can't really rely on what people tell you about them because when you look back on someone, the way that you talk about someone who's gone is always different from the way you would talk about them when they were here. It's just the nature of respecting the dead and looking back on someone. So everyone kind of talks about Cassie as if she was like such a great person, and she probably was, but we don't really ever get to see that. It's just what we are told from other people. And the one time we do see Cassidy, and this is what I was meaning, she says this thing along the lines of like, I'm glad that Nerissa killed me. And like it was part of the balance. Like she's evil and I'm good, so she had to kill me and that's just part of the cosmic balance. And it's like, girl, what? Who says that? Who actually says that? I'm like, it made more sense in the show that she was like, I've been dead for a long time. I'm sort of like, I've got over it. Like I was mad for a while, but I've made peace with it because I've been dead a long time. Whereas in the comic, she seems to, instead of just like making peace with it, she somehow turned it into a positive where she's like, it's actually banging that I got murdered. Like I love being murdered. It was so cool that my best friend killed me. Like that was rad. Girl, no, shut up. What are you talking about? Why can Nerissa not just like, you know how I feel about Nerissa, and I'm sure she's in here. She is. We'll get to her. But like, why are you trying to justify what Nerissa did? Why can you not just say like what she did was bad? She murdered me. It was a shitty thing to do. But no, she's like, it's part of the cosmic balance. Like, what the fuck is this? Charmed? Shut up. Next up, we have Cedric, and Mm, hmm. I'm gonna say I like them better in the TV show. It doesn't necessarily. I should make that point. Saying that I like someone better in the TV show doesn't necessarily mean I like the character that much. Just that I like them better in one version or the other. And for me, I do prefer Cedric in the TV show. In the comics, I really don't like Cedric very much. I know he's super popular. I mean, I've talked about this. I did a character ranking. I know how popular he is with comic fans. I've just never really seen it. I don't find him particularly engaging as a character, as a villain, or as a kind of trying to reform himself guy later on. I've never really had any feeling towards Cedric in the comics. Cedric in the show, I still hate him because he's like evil and he grooms Elyon, basically. But like as a villain, I think Cedric's a really good villain, and he is enjoyable, and he has that like he is his like D. Bradley Baker fucking kills it playing that role. He's iconic. He does have some great lines, like I will never recover from a cup of tea in a rebel commando. He is really creepy. He does that role really well. He messes with Elyon's head. He's so clever, and ultimately, like is in the sidelines. Like you think he's the dragon, you know what I mean? You think Phobos is the man in charge, and Cedric is his dragon sidekick. And then it turns out that in the background, the whole time Cedric's been scheming to steal Phobos's power and take over the world. That he's not loyal to Phobos. He's using Phobos just as much as Phobos thought he was using him. That's genius, and I love it. And then he fucking ate Phobos. He swallowed him whole. It's iconic. It is one of the greatest moments in television history. So we have to stan. So yeah, I think he's a lot better in the TV show because he never ate Phobos in the comics. So do we really need to say more? Next up, we have Lionel. Hmm, I want to say I feel like I like them equally. I feel like Lionel's pretty much the same character in both. He doesn't get a lot of screen time in the show. We don't see a massive amount of him. A lot of the time, if we're looking at Tarani, like if it's a story involving Tarani, it's usually involving her mother. All we really see of Lionel's like he really likes hiking, he's a bad cook, and he's allergic to fur. And that's kind of all we know about him. I think he's a lawyer. I'm not sure they ever even mention it in the show. I think he's a lawyer. But yeah, I mean he's a nice guy, he's a good dad, we like him. I can't think that I've got any particular thoughts that he's better in one or the other, so I'm gonna say I like him equally. Peter! I'm gonna say I like him better in the comics, actually. Um Peter's a bit of a himbo in the show. He kind of comes across like he's not got a lot of thoughts going on in his head. And I feel bad for him because he sort of I mean, I myself sort of like when I was younger, when I was young and dumb. Like actually that kind of sums it up. You're watching me have a flashback in real time. When I was younger, I made um an edited version of the Twilight New Moon trailer using clips from Witch because and in that trailer I made Peter Jacob because obviously Cornelia was Bella and Caleb was Edward. You know me. So Peter was Jacob. And that kind of said it all because I hate Jacob Black. I hate Jacob Black so much. And so in my head back then, I was viewing this love triangle as like Peter's the villain. He wants to take Cornelia away from Caleb. When in reality, Peter did nothing wrong because he didn't know. He didn't even know who she was. He didn't even know who he was dating because she was catfishing him, like real, really big catfishing going on there. So Peter did nothing wrong. My child self didn't like him because he was an obstacle for Cornelia and Caleb's relationship. But I do feel like he doesn't really get a great amount of content in the show because he actually spends more time like in that storyline than he really does. We really get to see him and Tarani interact. We don't really get to see him being an older brother because like pretty much the only time he ever factors into the series at all is in Cornelia's storyline for her and Caleb's relationship, and she doesn't even have a proper relationship with him because he's just there to be an obstacle to them getting back together, or like I suppose a part of like in a way it facilitates them getting back together. Um, Whereas in the comics, we get to see him as a person. We find out that he's sporty, he's artsy, he's a really good brother to Tarani. They've got a really close relationship. Um, and he's a really great guy. And when he is in a relationship with Cornelia later on, he's a really good boyfriend as well. Like he's a really good person. So Peter is like one of the best characters in the comics, I would say. Like he's genuinely such a good guy. Whereas in the show, he's just kind of there. He doesn't really do anything apart from kind of get in the way and be a himbo and walk into a pole. Um, yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame we don't get to see more of him and Tarani's relationship. It's a shame that he basically only exists to be in Cornelia and Caleb's epic love disaster that is the start of season 2. Anyway, okay, Teresa. I think I'm actually gonna say I'm indifferent about Teresa. Like, Teresa is Teresa. Like, of all the parents, she is like none of the parents, well, apart from like Thomas Fandom, like none of the parents in the show are bad parents, and none of the parents except from Thomas Fandom are bad parents in the comics. But like of all the parents who aren't Thomas Fandom, I would say Teresa's probably bottom because she is like outwardly antagonistic to her daughter. She is better, obviously, but she is. I mean, she slaps Tarani. Like, there's issues there. Um, and she's not much better in the show because she's still really antagonistic and won't trust Tarani and blames her for everything and outright accuses her of being a criminal when Tarani was actually trying to stop a robbery. But Teresa just immediately assumes that her daughter must have been one of the robbers, even though she should know Tarani better than that. And yeah, so like I'm not the biggest fan of her in either version, and she has the same problems in both versions. So yeah, I'm gonna say I'm indifferent because I don't dislike her, but like I don't really especially like her either. But you're supposed to feel that way about her because that's the way she's written. Oh, my girl Corny. Um, I mean the thing is, Cornelia is my favorite character in both versions. Like she is my girl in both versions, and I know people say like that she's probably like I don't know. I feel like Irma's the most different between both versions, but people tend to say it's Cornelia that she's written the most different between the two. But despite that, she's my favorite character in both. I love both versions of her with my whole heart. So I don't especially have a preference. Like if you ask me either version, who's your favorite girl? Who's your favorite character? Cornelia. 100%. So I like her equally because I love her regardless, and I love her in the reboot. Essentially, you can put Cornelia Hale in front of me in any variation, and I will look at her and go, "That's my girl." I support women's rights and women's wrongs, and it doesn't matter to me what you give me. I will still think that Cornelia Hale is the greatest thing since striped toothpaste. That's just unfortunately who I am, and you have to love me for it. Okay, Professor Collins. Um, I don't know. I suppose I'm indifferent about both as well. I'm not like particularly. I don't really have any particular feelings on Professor Collins either way. Like I don't especially like him or dislike him. Like he's not a character I particularly care about one way or the other. In either version, he is just kind of there. Like he's never done anything wrong. He's just fine. He's just a mid tier character. So I'm not particularly fussy either way. Elias Vandal. Elias is pretty much the same in both versions. The one exception is that in the show he escapes from the painting and joins the rebellion because like he is fighting for the rebellion. He's still there at the end of the second season because there is when they're in the Infinite City and X is for Xanadu, when Will is shouting to the guys, she shouts Elias as one of the guys that is there. So um he's like still part of the rebellion, so that's pretty cool that he went and did that to fight against, back to fight back against Phobos, after like Phobos trapped him in a painting. So that's pretty baller. Whereas in the comics, and in the comics, there's like a slightly different story because it's like to do with like him and like there was a woman, and he could like never see her face. It's just like a slightly different story as to how he got stuck in the painting and stuff like that. But generally speaking, like he's a good guy in both, so I think I'm gonna say I like them equally. Elyon. Elyon is gonna have to be I like them better in the comics, but not by like an insane degree. It's just that in the comics, Elyon has always been like one of my favorite characters, whereas in the show, she's not. I used to really dislike Elyon in the show, but I've changed my mind on her in recent years. But I don't know, in the comics, I just always really liked her. Like, I thought she was a really good villain. I thought she was a really interesting villain. And then I thought she was a really good. I liked her both ways. I liked her as a villain and I liked her as a good guy. I just really enjoy her character. I think she's got a really nice personality. She's really interesting. She goes through a lot. I just really like her in the comics. I'm very attached to comic Elyon, whereas TV show Elyon I like, but like not to the same degree. So that's a comic preferred one. Okay, we've got two of the Knights of Destruction here. Do we have the other two, or is it just we have Shagon? I don't think we have Kor. Oh no, we do. He's over there. The Knights of Destruction for me are definitely I like them better in the TV show. I think the Knights have more personality in the TV show than they do in the comics. I don't remember much about the Knights from the comics. They're just sort of there. Whereas in the TV show, like Tridart and Ember have a really like they have really fun personalities, really good dialogue, really good lines. Um and they also have a really funny dynamic with each other. There is something definitely going on between Tridart and Ember that is just really interesting to watch. There is some kind of it's like they fancy each other, but they also want to kill each other. It's quite enjoyable. And Cor is obviously like Mr. Huggles in the show, whereas in the comics he was like a wolf or a dog. He was like some scientist's dog. So he has like a more interesting story in the TV show just because it kind of we see that his loyalty is actually to Matt rather than Nerissa because he's still influenced by Mr. Huggles' devotion to Matt. So that's a really interesting thing that they have that isn't so much there in the comics. Even though he's still like Shagon's pet, like the scientist gets turned into Shagon and the dog was his pet, and it's the same in the TV show where like Matt gets turned into Shagon and Mr. Huggles is his pet. But I just think it comes across much better in the TV show. It's more interesting that way. So yeah, I put the three of them as light better in the TV show. And since we're on the Knights of Destruction, I'll go and get Shagon because Shagon is very cool in both versions. He is like super scary in the comics and the show, but I would say he's more enjoyable in the show. Partly because he's obviously like just a much more interesting character because of the whole Matt Shagon dichotomy. He's a much more complex character in the show because of that. And he's much more tied to the plot. He's not just a villain. He's not just there because Nerissa needs a guy to be scary. Like he's actually very intrinsically linked to Will and to the girls by extension, like because Will is their friend, Matt is their friend. He's very intrinsically linked into their lives, and that psychologically is very damaging for them. Especially when he starts going to school glamoured as Matt, that's very psychologically damaging that this guy is walking around wearing Matt's skin, but it's not Matt. He's just so much more interesting, and it makes him so much more scary because he can get into their heads in a way that comic Shagon can't. And he's so scary. He's so creepy. He's so downright evil. And he loves it. He just loves being evil. He's so happy to be evil. It's great. Like TV show Shagon is just one of the best characters ever. I love him. Next up we have Eric. I think for this one I'm going to say I like him better in the comics, but only really because we get more of him in the comic. in the TV show we don't see a huge amount of him. I literally like just recently recorded my Helen and Eric timeline, and basically every scene that Eric has is in that video. Like I think I used every single scene that Eric is actually in that video. Um, which kind of sums up how little he actually has in terms of screen time. The episode that shows him off the best is definitely S's for Self. That's really the only episode where we get to see him kind of properly do anything. Like, it's the only episode where he ever like interacts with anyone outside of Halen, and we actually get to see him as like a proper like member of the school. And he's fun, and he just wants to play. And I like him, but he certainly gets a lot more to do in the comic. So it's kind of hard to say that I would prefer him in the show when we don't really get a huge amount of him. I'm sure if we got season 3, I'm sure we would have got to see far more of Eric. It's just that he comes into the series so late because he doesn't get introduced until part way through season 2 and is only in like 6 episodes or something. So he doesn't get as much time to shine as Comic Eric. And Comic Eric was one of the few boys in the series that never did anything wrong. You know, like Caleb, asshole, Matt, asshole, Nigel, started out good, turned into an asshole. Um who else have we got? Other like one-off boys that kind of sucked. Eric never did anything wrong. Eric was a good guy. So, yeah. Frost. For this one, I am definitely going to say I dislike them equally. Frost is like one of the least interesting villains in the whole series. I would say I just don't find him particularly. I don't find him interesting. I don't think he's got much of a personality, and I don't really care. And I think that's true of both versions. Like the most interesting thing he ever did was like pretend to be a guy and walk behind Tarani, which gives us that incredible line of a guy was walking behind you and then he kept walking. But other than that, Frost just kind of sucks. And I don't like him, so I don't really care. That is Matt's grandfather. I guess this is another kind of I'm indifferent about both. Like he's a lovely guy, he's a good granddad and whatever, but he is kind of just there. Like he's not he's a good guy, he cares about Will, he cares about Matt, and that's great, and we love it. But like as a character, like he's not I don't really have a huge amount of feelings on him either way. So um like I don't dislike him, but like I don't like particularly care. He's just sort of there. I feel bad because like he's just like a nice old man, but like you know what I mean. I don't mean he's like a bad. I don't mean that I don't care. I just mean that he's not a character I think about very often because he's just kind of a background supporting character. Bess and Courtney. Um. Hmm. This is tough because they have kind of different personalities. In the comics, they're a bit kind of like snooty, kind of like the nerd that like thinks they're better than everyone else, whereas in the show they are more just kind of gossip queens that are like obsessed with the drama. Which like moods, and I feel it because I love the drama. I live for the drama as long as the drama does not involve me. I'm one of these people that will like absolutely get invested in every single drama. Like I watch, people. My friends make fun of me because like, I'm always they're always they're like you're always on drama YouTube, and I'm like, yeah, because I love the drama. Like I live for the tea. I want all of it. Like I want all of the tea, and I relate to them in that sense that like the way that they're going around the school and all they want to know is like who's making out with who wore the worst outfit, like me, mood. I relate. But they were probably like better written characters. They seemed like more outwardly mean in the comics, whereas in the TV show they were more just kind of annoying. Like especially because they kept like they joined the school newspaper, they joined the radio station. They don't seem to actually have like an in the comics they were like genuine like antagonists to the girls at school, whereas in the show I don't think they actually are. The only person they seem to have a problem with is Cornelia in that one episode where they make fun of her. and they don't realize she's around to hear it. But they generally just seem like people that are kind of annoying, but they don't seem to have an actual like antagonistic dynamic with the witch girls. They spend a lot of time around Irma, so um hmm it's difficult because I feel like I'm talking about two different characters here. Like I feel like the Bess and Courtney in the comics are quite radically different from the Bess and Courtney in the show. And I like them I like both versions, but for different reasons. So I'm finding it hard to say. I suppose in that sense I like them equally because I like both versions but for different reasons. Um yeah, we'll go with that. Elizabeth, I am fairly certain. For the longest time, the internet told me that her last name is Landon, Elizabeth Landon, that she's not actually Elizabeth Hale. But it's other than that one microsite that looked, because it was so fuzzy, but it looked as if it said Landon. Other than that, everything I always see, her last name is always listed as Hale, but in my head, her name's Elizabeth Landon, so I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, Elizabeth. Elizabeth gets probably the least screen time of all the parents in the show. She really doesn't do much. She is. She moves Cornelia's hair in the Parents' Night episodes. She is at breakfast in service to the community, but I don't even think she has lines. Um, she makes a comment about the padding in W's for Witch. And she's in the very beginning and very end of U is for Undivided. But she literally hardly ever appears and does very little. So I feel like I'm gonna have to say I like her better in the comics because it's really hard to form an opinion on Elizabeth in the show when she barely ever does anything and hardly ever speaks. She's Nancy Lenardi though, right? Like that's pretty cool. They should have given her more lines. Harold. I think I like Harold equally because he seems to kind of have the same personality as this kind of like jovial sort of bumbling dad man who makes dad jokes, just like your quintessential sitcom dad. That is the vibe that I get from Harold Hale. Like the car wash episodes, he's giving bumbling dad man. The beginning of you is for Undivided, he's giving bumbling dad man. And the first time we see him in the comics is when he's coming home from work and he's sort of like laughing and joking with Cornelia on the way in the door, which is nice because if you come home from working a long shift and you don't immediately start yelling at your family, that's a good sign. So yeah, I think I like him the same. Lillian. Lillian's a little bit older in the show than she is in the comics, which I think makes her more tolerable as a character. I cannot speak. In the comics, she does seem to be a toddler, or at the very most like 4 or 5, whereas in the show she's 8. So she just sort of is a much more interesting character because she speaks more like a child with like proper thoughts in her head. She's a proper primary school child. She does know things, whereas a child that's like 4 years old basically is like talking to a like Labrador puppy that has learned how to speak. So I think she's better in the TV show, but it's probably just because they aged her up a bit, which made her easier to write for and made her a more um just made her more of a character, gave her more of a personality because she's got the ability to hold a proper conversation. So I'm gonna say she's better in the TV show. She's the heart of Earth, but your mileage may vary on whether or not that was a good decision. I like it, but a lot of people don't. Wow, we went this far before we actually get to Halen and Art. We've done all these characters, and the only Guardian we've had so far is Cornelia. Halen, that's gonna be an I like them equally because Halen I think is the most similar between the comics and the show. I don't think her personality comes across as basically the same in both and I love her, so I think it would be weird to try and rank one over the other because she really is the same character in both versions. Um, yeah, we should have had another I like them better in the reboot. No, but there would be no character that would go into that. But in my head, because I was about to say and in the reboot, and I'm like, that's not part of this discussion. We don't need to talk about that. Irma. So Irma to me is the one that I think comes across the most different. I think Irma's written quite differently in the show from the comic. You might disagree, but that's how I feel. I feel like a lot of I could be wrong, but like I feel like there's like a degree of like the way Irma's written in the show. She has a certain type of humor that I think lends itself to Candy Milo's delivery. I feel like they wrote a lot of her lines sort of because they knew that like Candy can make it so funny. Whereas in the comics, you're obviously reading her voice in your own head voice. I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of how I feel because I feel like she was always the funniest character in the comics, but she just has a level of humor on the show that outranks even her comic self. But she is a character who had three separate episodes where her plotline was where she was supposed to learn not to be such a bitch and then kept doing it anyway. Like her three of her focal episodes are about her being a dick to someone and then learning that she shouldn't. The first is G is for garbage, where she's a dickhead to Blanc and then has to apologize. The second is L's for loser, where she's a dickhead to Martin, justifiably to an extent, but again has to learn how to not be a dick. And then O is for beans, where she's a dickhead to all of her friends and then has to apologize for it. And it's like, yikes on bikes. I don't know. Uh, I don't actually know if I with all that speaking, I don't actually think I came to any sort of conclusion. I think Irma has more personality in the show. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say. I think Irma in the comics was unfortunately always sort of abandoned by the narrative. I've seen a lot of people try and say that like Tarani was always getting abandoned, but she wasn't. Like she got storyline. She had her storyline with Nigel. She had her storyline where she left and got replaced by Orub. Irma never really had a story. She didn't even have a boyfriend until, and I'm not saying she has to, I'm not meaning that, but I just mean that the other girls had boyfriends and stuff, which gave them storylines outside of the main, like, Guardian story. Irma didn't even really get that. Like, even when she was with Joel, it never got a massive amount of focus. She just always felt like the character that was out of focus. She was just sort of in scenes to make jokes, but never really got much of a story to her. She's Joey. She's Joey from Friends, is what she is. Because that's what Matt LeBlanc always said about Joey, was that Joey was always there to make jokes or to be the butt of a joke or to say something silly or to do something funny, but very rarely ever got a storyline. And at the end of the series is the only one whose story doesn't actually get wrapped up in any way, and that's why they went and made Joey, and the less said about that. Irma's the joy of the group. She's there to make jokes, but unfortunately, that's at the detriment to her actual narrative. Whereas in the show, she at the very least gets storylines. She gets stuff to do. She has a personality outside of just being the funny one. It does mean that her personality is usually being mean to people, but it's at least there. So I'm going to say I like her better in the show. Because I think in my last time I was doing a Guardian ranking, I ranked Irma as my least favourite out of the comic, and it is genuinely that. It's just because she doesn't get enough to do. It's hard to rank her higher than the others when she doesn't do anything. And that's a writing problem, but you know. Cadma. So Cadma's another awkward one because her storyline is so dramatically different between the show and the comic. In the comic, she works for this thing called like the Christ, what is it called? Something Star Foundation or something. Like the White Star Foundation or something. She worked there with Halinor and then Halinor died. And she like lives in Fadden Hill, so she has this connection to Will. Whereas in the show, she's like been trapped on a planet of purple trees for God knows how long. Which just makes her like dramatically different because she's just got two completely different stories. She doesn't get a massive amount of personality in the comic. She's like just she helps the girl. She like lives in a house. She like lives in like a fancy house or something. I think they meet her on like a conservatory full of plants or something like that. It's been a while. My brain is melting. I can hear the actual cogs turning in my brain as I try to dredge this up. Um, but in the show, she's also a pain in the arse. Although they all know that, like, that is the point. They acknowledge, like, Cassidy is a pain in the arse. They don't say that, but it's like that is basically what they're saying is that like Cadma's a pain in the arse. She can never admit that she's wrong. She's like far too like full of herself. She's got way too much sense of her own self importance. Da da da. Um, I don't know. I guess I'm gonna say I'm indifferent about both, which isn't entirely true. It's just that I don't really have strong feelings on Cadma. I kind of wish I did, because I find her interesting and I love her design. Her design is so good. And she's CCH Pounder in the show. Like, you do not understand, like, what I like lost my mind when I found that out. Like, freaking Moat from Avatar. Like, one of my favorite films of all time. Crazy to me. Um, but yeah, I suppose she's just like, yeah. I like her the same in both, but not to the extent of like these characters. So I'll put her in the middle. Principal Knickerbocker. I think as well I'm gonna put her in indifferent. Don't get me wrong, like I really like Principal Knickerbocker. She's funny and I love her. I love the way that Candy Milo plays her in the show. Like her voice and everything is just so funny. Um but again, she's just sort of there to be the teacher, you know? Um so I don't have any particularly strong feelings on Knickerbocker, other than thinking that her name is hilarious. But yeah, I love the way that Candy performs her. But other than that, she's just sort of there to be there. Anna. Anna's another awkward one because, like, I'm pretty sure Greg Wiseman said on his Ask Greg blog at one point that they were going to do something about with Irma's birth mother in season 3. But I also find it hard to believe that Anna's not her biological mother in the show because Irma and her have the same voice actress and they look identical. Like, look at these two characters. How are these two not related? Like, there's no way. There's no way that those are not. Other than the only other reason is that Tom Lear marries a woman who's the double of his daughter, which is fucking weird when you think about it. If you think about that for too long, that's a bit weird. Um, they've got the same voice actress and pretty much the same voice. Like they must be biologically related. But anyway, Anna's like fine, she's fun. I like them both equally. Chris Lair is probably an I'm indifferent about both. I don't really care. I don't really care about Chris Lair. He's like an annoying little brother character. He adds something to the Lair family dynamic. Outside of that, I mean, to be fair, he has really like I love Return of the Tracker, and he's really funny in that episode where he's just torturing Caleb and like throwing fish bowls about fish hockey, playing fish hockey in the house and like throwing stuff at Caleb. But outside of that, I've not got any real strong feelings about him because he's just an annoying kid character and that's not really my jam. Tom Lair. I like Tom. I like Tom in both versions. He's a good dad. He really loves his daughter. He proves that all cops are not bastards. He is the one cop that we trust. Um, yeah, no, he's just a really good guy overall. I don't really have any criticisms of Tom in either version. So Chen and Joan. Um, yeah, I guess I like them both equally as well. Like, yeah, they don't get a massive amount of screen time in the TV show, but the time that they do get, they're really good characters. Um, and they're really good parents in the comics as well. So I have no criticisms there. I like them both equally. Luba. Luba's an interesting one because Luba's a villain in the comics, but she's not in the show, which makes it hard to decide because that's quite a drastic difference to take a character who was a villain and make them into a character who's not a villain. She's not especially a hero, but she's not a villain. She is just doing she is on the side of good, you know? So to take a character and just radically change their personality in such a way makes it really hard for me to decide because that is basically two different characters. They are essentially two completely different people with the same name and face. Um, but I guess I like her better on the show because Luba is quite an annoying villain in the comics. I get what she's doing and I get why she's doing it, but she's very, very infuriating. And she also goes right in on Cornelia, which is unnecessary, in my opinion. Leave my girl alone. She just wanted to bring her boyfriend back from being a flower. And, like, haven't we all been there? Haven't we all tried to use our magic powers to resurrect our plant boyfriend? You know? Like, there's no need to be such a dick about it. So yeah, I guess I like her better on the show. She looks cool as fuck though, look at her. Crazy cat lady, we love it. McCavity, McCavity, there's no one like McCavity. Zacharias, yes. I mean, indifferent. I don't really have an opinion on Zacharias either way. He's cool. I realised, right? I only realised this recently when I was doing my Halen and Eric video. Why has he got an Irish accent in the show? I had never noticed it. I'd never noticed it because I was watching the clip where Eric is talking to Halen in the school lunchroom and he's doing an impression of his granddad and he's like, young man. And I was like, why are you doing an Irish accent? What the fuck is that meant to be? And then I watched a clip of Zacharias in it and I'm like, oh my god, he does have an Irish accent. Why? Why is he Irish? Okay, I just looked and I can't even find out who voices him. I can't find it anywhere. It's not on the IMDb. I can't find anywhere who voices this character. So yeah, I was going to try and look up whether he even is an Irish man or whether they just got an American actor to do an Irish accent for no reason. But I don't know. It's just strange. Anyway, Martin. Um, Martin I prefer in the TV show, I think. I love Martin in both versions, don't get me wrong. But I think I prefer him in the TV show. I don't know, maybe it's just because D. Bradley Baker is so funny at playing him. Like, so funny. But I just love Martin. Like, I feel like if I'd been at school with Martin, I would have been his friend. You know what I mean? And like, I get, like, he needs to back off. But I really like him. And I feel like he doesn't come across, in the comics, I think he comes across as, like, quite kind of, like, stereotypically geeky. Whereas in the show, I don't think he does so much. He's kind of like a cool loser. And I just like that. I don't know. I feel like I mean, he's friends with Matt, so I don't think he is, like, as dorky in the show as he is in the comics. Not that being dorky is a bad thing, but I just like the way that he's written and the way that he's portrayed in the show a bit more. Matt is quite obviously, much like Caleb, just like an automatic better in the TV show. Matt in the comics sucks. He is Batman, but even before he was Batman, he was never really a particularly good character. He's a shitty boyfriend, he's a shitty guy. He looks like he's 40, but he's supposed to be like 15. Him and Will are always arguing, they're always jealous of each other. He sucks. Matt in the comics sucks, whereas Matt in the TV show is a literal angel presented to us from heaven itself. He is my son, I love him. He is everything we do not deserve, Matt Olson. None of us, we are not worthy. Medina and McTiernan, I guess I like them equally. They are pretty much the same in both versions. And Medina and McTiernan, like, I will always think that we were robbed of a Medina and McTiernan, like, special issue where they, like, solve crimes. I would love for it. they needed more screen time. I love them. And they needed more screen time in the show because, like, that one episode that they got was not enough. Long live Medina and McTiernan. Napoleon is obviously an automatic better in the TV show because in the comics he's just a cat. But in the TV show he's a familiar that talks. And he talks in the voice of Ed freaking Asner. So, like, come on. Ed Asner was my man. I loved him so much. He was so awesome. I'm still gutted that he's gone. He was great. And that cat is so funny. The fact that he speaks in this, like, I mean, he's basically Salem. He's like a parody of Salem from Sabrina. But he speaks in this like gravelly voice that makes him sound like a film noir hard broiled. He sounds like Max Payne. It's so funny. And he calls like Cornelia like Toots and Pinky. It's funny. I love him. Napoleon's an icon. Nerissa. So Nerissa has the distinction of like being my favorite villain in the comic, but at the same time, I don't love her in the comic nearly as much as I love her in the show. Nerissa in the show is one of my favorite characters to the point that I am like genuinely like unhinged obsessed with her. She is the only witch character other than Cornelia and Caleb that I have a playlist for, which I think says a lot. Um, she just I have so much lore in my head on what I think about like Nerissa's life was like in the show. I'm obsessed with her. She is everything, and she's definitely a better in the TV show. I think because, like, I mean, we're having this discussion as well recently. In the TV show, she's got a lot. She's got a lot of layers. She's a far more complex character. She's got a proper backstory, whereas in the comic, it's just sort of like she was a guardian. She got obsessed with power. She killed her friend, and now she's evil. And it's like that's just kind of it. Whereas the show really breaks that down a bit more and goes deeper into who she is as a person. Like she does regret killing Cassidy. She did feel consumed by guilt from that. But then instead of anyone helping her, like, I mean, this is the thing. It's like Kanjakar gave her that power, and that power went to her head. They chose her. They gave her the power. The power went to her head. They took the power away from her. And without anyone really stepping in to check on her and see if she's okay, she lost her mind because she needed the power back because by this point she's like an addict, you know what I mean? Like she that power was everything to her and she needed it back. So then she accidentally killed Cassidy trying it wasn't intentional. I'm pretty sure it was in the comic and they show it was not intentional, it was an accident. She kills Cassidy. Now she's traumatized because she just murdered her best friend slash girlfriend because they were canon in the show. She just murdered her girlfriend. She now doesn't have her power. She doesn't have her girlfriend. She doesn't have any of her friends because they've all left, and now she's been locked in a cave. And, like, no freaking wonder she came out of that not particularly well in the head. Like, that is just a trauma conga line. And instead of anyone stepping in from Kanjakar and being like, maybe we erred here, we should maybe try and give this girl some help and therapy. No, we'll just lock her in a cave for years and then are surprised when she comes back and she's a bit pissed off about it. And that's why I think TV show Nerissa is so much better because she has genuine layers and we can understand how she's ended up the way she is because it's basically entirely all Kandakar's fault. They put her on that path and they let her go crazy and it's all their fault. But on top of all of that, she still like cares and I honestly think that the reason that she reunited all her friends was not so much because she wanted their power, but because she genuinely missed having a group of friends because she's been alone for so long. Like, she obviously craves love. She loves Cassidy, she loves Julian, she loves her son, Caleb, she loves her friends. But she knows that because of who she is, no one's ever going to actually want to spend time with her, so she has to mind control everyone to be her friends, which is honestly one of the saddest things I've ever heard. She's a great character, and I would die for her. Moving on. Nigel is definitely a better in the comics. Nigel in the TV show is actually kind of embarrassing. Like, why does he talk like that? Why does he talk like a 90s surfer dude? Why does he keep saying sweet? He has no thoughts in his head. There's not a single thought in that head. It is like, no. He doesn't have any of the depth that he has in the comics. So, yeah. The Oracle. The Oracle's a difficult one because I feel like I like him better in the show, but that's only really because they never got far enough into the story to get to the point where he becomes a problem. because it's arc 3 that he starts showing like the signs of being a problem, because like he changes like Trani's eyesight with her consent, which is what makes her leave, and he keeps doing things that he shouldn't be doing, and he keeps overstepping the boundaries and involving himself in their lives when he shouldn't, and that leads to the whole trial of the Oracle arc. But we never got that far in the show. So in the show he just comes across as like a benevolent helper man. Um but I think he's sus even in the show, because again, the amount of trauma that they put on Nerissa and did nothing about it, and then basically were just like, oh no, she's evil. What can we do? It's like, no, that's your fault. That was you. You did that. So I suppose I dislike him equally because I don't like the Oracle. So he can go in there. Phobos is also, I like him better in the show. Phobos in the show is just like so iconic, and the one in the comics, as much as he's a great villain and everything, he doesn't have the sassiness of TV show Philip. Philip? Oh my god, that's not his name. That's the name from the episode where he pretends to be human. I mean, yeah, we don't get that in the comic either. We don't get Phobos pretending to be a high schooler, which is hysterical. Phobos is just such a sassy gay sass man in the show that like I cannot in good conscience say that I prefer him in the comics, because like he is such an icon. He has baby girl. He has that picture of Leon Kennedy that says baby girl, is make that but Phobos. Galgita slash Mrs. Rudolph. What is her name? I was gonna say, in the TV show she does have a first name as Mrs. Rudolph. And now I've forgotten what it is. It's like it begins with D. It's like Delilah or something. Anyway, Galgita Rudolph. I probably like her equally. Like she's the same in both, really. She's gonna tutor Elyon in math, which is cruel and unusual. But whatever. Susan, I probably like her better in the show a bit. I feel like Susan in the comics is she she obviously loves her daughter, but she really does make some truly terrible parenting decisions. And she does the same in the show, but not quite to the same extent. And she does tend to listen to Will a bit more in the show, and she does seem to be a bit more understanding, but she does have a tendency to make some quite ridiculous mistakes. But I don't know, I just prefer her in the show. I think she comes across better. Tarani. Hmm. I probably like Tarani equally. I mean, I really love Tarani as a character, and she has different qualities in both. Like in the show, she's like really scared at the beginning of the series. Like the running joke is like she's afraid of everything, like height fright, imported cheese fright. And in the comics, I love her because she's like the real peacekeeper of the group. But then in the show, she does have like a real fiery temper in season 2, which I think is super interesting. And that whole storyline with her mum. Um, yeah, like I get it's sort of like the Grumpers, where it's like I like her in both versions, but for different reasons. But yeah, I probably like her equally. Obviously, Tony Vandam is better than Thomas Vandam. Tony Vandam in the TV show is better than Thomas Vandam from the comics, because Tony Vandam is not a piece of shit. Whereas Thomas Vandam is. Thomas was going to. He was trying to like manipulate and like try and steal custody from Susan by trying to claim that Susan was like a terrible mother and she was abusive and all this shit to try and take Will from her, which is a horrible thing to do. Whereas in the show, he's just absent. He's just not been a part of Will's life for quite a while. And he comes back and announces that he's engaged, and Will didn't know any of this, which is not the best thing to do. But he does seem to be genuinely trying to make amends by the end of the series, so I can appreciate that. Tibor is Tibor. Like, I don't really have feelings on Tibor either way. Like, he is who he is. He's just a guy who helps the Oracle. I don't really have feelings on Tibor. Uriah is definitely better in the show. Um, because like in the comics he's like just a straight up bully, whereas in the show he's more of like the class clown type of character rather than an outright bully. And he's not doing anything. He doesn't commit like straight up crimes like he does in the comic. Like the very first issue of the comic is him putting freaking fireworks inside a pumpkin and almost burning the school down. Whereas in the show, like he just does things like putting a worm in Cornelia's face in science class and like putting buckets of sludge or whatever above the doors in the school. Like he's just like your classic prankster, and he doesn't really seem to be that much of an like an arsehole in the in the show like he is in the comics. He's more of a fun character, so I do prefer him. Vathek I love in both versions. He's a great character. Yeah, I probably like him equally because Vathek's great. I do love Vathek. He's just like a big blue teddy bear, and I love him. Well, I prefer Will in the comics, although I do obviously love her in the show. But Will was always the character that I really sort of like I really felt Will's emotions in the comics. I went through a lot of stuff similar to her growing up, and I really felt her. I just really felt her emotions. Um, and she has, yeah, I just kind of gravitate to her more in the comics, and I think she goes through a lot more, and she has a lot of deeper issues in the comics, which makes her like a more interesting and more relatable character. Whereas those were scaled back in the show because the show wasn't allowed to kind of look at the more dark storylines, and Will did have some darker things like to do with her dad, to do with like her issues with her appearance. Whereas we didn't really get to see those things in the show, so like her character doesn't really seem quite, I mean she does go through hell, but at the same time like Matt disappears for months and she seems to not be particularly bothered by it, which I still find really strange. I don't know why that didn't, like I said, she's either really good at compartmentalizing or the writers forgot that she was supposed to be upset. Um, yeah, I think I just related to her more in the comics than the show, but I still love her in the show. And Yan Lin is definitely I like her better in the TV show because she is so funny in the show. She is such a hilarious character. She's such an icon. And in the comics, she's dead. She comes back, in fairness, but she never has the role like she has in the TV show. She never has the icon status that she has in the TV show. So yeah. So there we go. That is my definitive ranking of characters and who I prefer in the comic and the TV show, and it probably shouldn't be any big surprise to anyone that I prefer most of the characters in the show. Or at the very least I like them the same. There's very few characters I like better in the comics, and that's probably just because it is me and I am the show is my life and it's my whole heart and soul. But there we go. Leave me your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what terrible decisions I've made because I know you all well. You all love a tier list and you all love to roast me for my tier lists. So do give me your opinions, and I will see you in whatever I post next. Bye, everyone.